By 9 in the morning, my dad was hammering on my door. Not knocking, hammering. Fist turned to battering rams, shaking the flimsy frame in its hinges. His voice, a familiar weapon, ricocheted through the apartment, each syllable of my name laced with accusation, as if I, Scarlett, owed him the very air he breathed. Behind me, Ellie stood clutching her Christmas drawing, her little eyes wide with a fear no 7-year-old should know. She was a tiny sentinel in pink pajamas, her artwork a fragile shield against the storm. But scenes like this, the shouting, the door-rattling rage, they never just begin with the eruption. They simmer, they fester, they start with a whisper, a single line drawn in the sand that irrevocably alters the landscape. A text message, a split-second decision, a carelessly tossed phrase. Mine began the moment my mom's message flashed across my phone screen. "We're skipping your kid's birthday. Things are tight." And it ended, or rather lurched, into a new, terrifying beginning with a truth so deeply buried, so carefully concealed, that my family never dreamed I'd unearth it. Before I delve into this unraveling, tell me where you're listening from. It helps to know I'm not shouting into the void. It helps to know someone out there understands. My name is Scarlett, and for most of my life, survival has meant a delicate dance of lowered expectations, a carefully calibrated resignation, especially when it came to my parents. It sounds dramatic, I know, but when you're the dependable one, the quiet cog in a dysfunctional machine, the one who anticipates every need and fixes every problem without being asked, you learn to swallow disappointment like it's a daily vitamin, a bitter pill washed down with lukewarm coffee. I live in a small, sun-drenched apartment a few blocks from the coast. The air here always carries a hint of salt, and the faint, comforting scent of old pine from the grove nearby. It's nothing fancy, just 4 rooms and a sliver of a balcony overlooking a courtyard filled with struggling rose bushes. But it's warm, it's bright, and most importantly, it's asterisk mine. It's just enough space for me and my daughter, Ellie, who manages to fill every corner with her overflowing creativity. Drawings taped to the walls, glitter trails marking her passage, and that soft, almost imperceptible humming she does when she's lost in a world of her own making. A world I desperately try to protect. The morning my mom's text detonated, Ellie was sitting at the kitchen table, diligently coloring a unicorn. Not just any unicorn, mind you. This one was a queen, resplendent in a glittering crown, its horns spiraling towards the heavens. She looked up at me with those eyes, those hopeful, unwavering eyes that she'd had since she was a toddler. The same eyes she inherited from me, though hers, bless her heart, still held more light, more unwavering belief. She asked, her voice a small, hopeful thread, if Grandma and Grandpa were coming to her birthday party this year. I told her I certainly hoped so. I hadn't even finished slicing the strawberries for her lunch, a carefully constructed tower of red sweetness, when my phone buzzed, cutting through the morning's fragile peace. "We're skipping your kid's birthday. Things are tight." No explanation, no apology, just a curt, impersonal statement, tossed at me like a crumpled receipt, a discarded piece of trash. I stared at the screen, the cold, hard words, searing themselves into my memory. I took a long, slow breath, trying to steady my racing heart, willing myself to maintain a neutral expression before Ellie could detect the tremor in my face, the lie forming on my lips. I typed back, my fingers stiff and clumsy. "No problem." Because what else do you say? What can you say when the people who are supposed to care, the people who are genetically predisposed to love you unconditionally, simply don't? But a couple of problem, a monumental, soul-crushing problem. Not just for me, but for Ellie, who deserved so much more than casual dismissals and empty promises. I spent the rest of the day navigating a minefield of forced smiles and hollow reassurances. I helped Ellie glue iridescent sparkles to her drawing, answered work emails with a detached professionalism, and desperately tried to ignore the sharp, insistent pinch in my chest every time I remembered that text, every time I saw the hopeful tilt of Ellie's head. I tried to be rational, to offer excuses where there were none. Maybe my parents were genuinely struggling financially. Maybe some unforeseen emergency had arisen. But then, the memories flooded in, unbidden and unwelcome. The years I'd spent covering their exorbitant phone plan when my dad lost yet another job. The months I quietly paid their car insurance so they could keep their battered sedan running. The countless repairs, The late-night calls filled with panicked pleas. The emergency money that always seemed so urgent. Until Mostyn needed help. Until Mostyn needed them. My parents loved to preach about the sanctity of family. The unwavering bond of blood, mostly, it seemed, when they needed something from me. Ellie's birthday arrived that weekend, a pale imitation of the celebration she deserved. She wore a little purple dress, the one she'd picked out herself from the clearance rack at Target, and asked if we could make cupcakes instead of buying a store-bought cake. A subtle, heartbreaking concession to the reality of our lives. I spread a tiny, floral print picnic blanket in our living room, the cheerful pattern a defiant splash of color against the gray, rain-streaked windows. We played her favorite music, a relentlessly cheerful mix of pop songs and Disney soundtracks, opened the few small gifts I'd painstakingly saved up for, and invited 2 of her classmates, whose parents were kind enough to drop them off. She laughed, she danced, she tried so hard to soak up every second, to create a memory that would override the disappointment that lingered beneath the surface. But as the day wound down, as her friends went home, their laughter echoing faintly in the hallway, she walked slowly over to the table, picked up a cupcake, its frosting slightly smudged, and stared at the single flickering candle I'd saved just for her. "Maybe next year," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the drumming rain. She didn't cry. She simply cleaned up the scattered glitter, her small hands moving with a practiced efficiency, and moved on, the way children do, when they sense your own fragile composure, when they instinctively know to shield you from their pain. But something in me shifted that night. It wasn't anger. Not yet. Just a dull, persistent ache. A hollow echo of disappointments past. A feeling that was far too familiar for a mother watching her child. Christmas arrived faster than I expected, as it always does when you're juggling bills, work deadlines, and a child who marks off the dwindling days with paper rings she tapes around her wrist. A tangible representation of her unwavering hope. Ellie woke up early that morning, her face flushed with excitement, still dressed in her red pajamas. She was clutching the drawing she'd made for my parents, a simple but heartfelt depiction of 2 grandparents holding hands with a little girl nestled between them. She'd even drawn a tiny, lopsided heart floating above their heads, a testament to the boundless love she so freely offered. She sat by the window, her legs tucked underneath her, humming softly to herself, as if the melody alone could conjure them into existence, as if she could somehow will her grandparents to appear. I made hot chocolate, its rich, comforting aroma filling the apartment. I kept surreptitiously checking my phone, feigning nonchalance, pretending I wasn't desperately hoping for a call, a text, anything that would validate her belief, anything that would prove that she mattered. Noon came, then 2, then 3. The hours ticked by with cruel indifference. Not a call, not a message, not even an accidentally sent emoji, just silence. A thick, suffocating, all too familiar silence that pressed down on us like a physical weight. "Maybe they're busy," I said, forcing a lightness into my voice that felt brittle and false. Ellie nodded, her small shoulders slumping slightly, the disappointment registering in the subtle droop of her mouth. When she finally drifted into the living room to watch a movie, her initial excitement extinguished. I opened my laptop. I shouldn't have. Some small, rational part of me knew better. But habit is a powerful force, especially when you've spent years trying to convince yourself that your family is better than they are, that their shortcomings are just temporary lapses in judgment, anomalies in an otherwise loving relationship. The moment the screen flickered to life, I saw it. A Christmas tree, taller than their living room ceiling, its branches laden with ornaments and twinkling lights, piles of brightly wrapped gifts spilling across the floor, an ostentatious display of abundance. Balloon arches, garishly colorful, twisting over the doorway, creating a festive, almost surreal scene. My sister Marissa and her children were tearing into presents with a frenzied enthusiasm, their faces lit up with unrestrained glee, as if they were starring in a holiday commercial. My mom was in the background, her face beaming, holding a glitter-covered box, smiling so wide that her eyes almost disappeared in a crinkled mass of crow's feet. And above it all, her caption floated, a casual pronouncement that landed like a sucker punch to the gut. "So blessed to be with our favorite little ones." Favorite. The word hit harder than any insult, sharper than any curse. It was casual, thoughtless, devoid of malice, and yet it spoke volumes. It was true. Apparently. I didn't realize Ellie had walked up behind me until I felt her small hand on my arm. She saw the screen, saw the balloons, saw the mountains of presents, saw the unadulterated joy she wasn't a part of. She didn't say anything at first. Her little face went still, almost unnaturally so, the vibrancy draining away, leaving behind a blank, expressionless mask. It was a stillness no 7-year-old should possess. Then she whispered it, her voice barely a breath. "They forgot me again, didn't they?" I swallowed hard, desperately trying to dislodge the lump that had formed in my throat, but no words came out. I simply pulled her close, wrapping my arms around her small, trembling body, but she remained quiet, her gaze fixed on the bright, happy faces on the screen. The same faces that couldn't be bothered to send her a simple message, a fleeting acknowledgement of her existence. For the rest of the evening, I moved through the apartment like a ghost, a hollow shell of my former self. I reheated dinner, the flavors lost on my numb palate. I folded laundry, the familiar task offering no solace. I answered emails, my mind racing, my focus fractured, barely comprehending the words on the screen. Ellie played with her paints at the table, meticulously brushing shades of gold and navy across a sheet of paper, the colors blurring together in a swirling vortex of muted sadness. Every so often, she'd glance at the window, her eyes searching the empty darkness, then look quickly away, her small fists tightening in her lap. Later that night, after she finally fell asleep beside me on the couch, her breathing shallow and uneven, I sat alone in the dim light of the hallway. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, oppressive, pressing against my ribs, reminding me of every bill I'd paid, every late-night call I'd answered for my parents, every time I'd put myself last, sacrificing my own needs on the altar of family. And for what? A skipped birthday? A silent Christmas? A daughter learning, far too early, that love can be lopsided, conditional, and cruelly unfair? Something in me didn't just crack, it aligned. A clean, sharp fracture appeared, cleaving my existence into two distinct halves. What I'd accepted all my life, the ingrained patterns of behavior, the reflexive acts of self-sacrifice, and what I would no longer allow. I woke up the morning after Christmas with a strange kind of clarity, a quiet, unwavering resolve that felt almost unnerving in its intensity. The apartment was shrouded in the kind of stillness that descends after a long night of pretending everything is fine, a deceptive calm that belied the turmoil raging beneath the surface. Ellie was curled up on the couch, still clutching the gold and navy painting she'd created the night before, her small face pale and drawn. I tucked a blanket around her, gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, and simply stood there for a moment, letting the full weight of everything settle in my chest, acknowledging the years of resentment, the decades of quiet suffering, the unwavering love I felt for this little girl. Then, I turned on my laptop, not to check work emails, not to mindlessly scroll through social media, not to make excuses for people who had long since stopped deserving them. I opened the Payments tab on my bank's website. Years of automatic transfers stared back at me, a damning indictment of my own enabling behavior. Phone plans, car insurance, streaming service memberships, small emergency amounts that had insidiously morphed into ingrained routines, predictable and unwavering. It was a meticulously documented map of every time I'd tried to keep the peace, every time I'd foolishly believed that helping them financially would somehow translate into emotional availability, that my sacrifices would finally earn me their love and approval, that showing up for them would somehow mean they'd finally show up for us. My hand hovered over the cancel button for a long second. Not from fear, but from a profound sense of realization. I had allowed this to happen. I had quietly, passively, enabled their behavior. I clicked the first one. Cancel. Then the next, and the next. A silent, satisfying chain reaction of liberation. No dramatic music, no shaking hands, just a quiet, almost clinical calm that I hadn't felt in years. By the time the sun rose, casting a pale golden light through the window, everything they depended on me for was gone. Not out of revenge, not out of spite, but out of pure, unadulterated necessity. Out of an unwavering desire to protect myself and, more importantly, to protect Ellie from their toxic dysfunction. If they couldn't bring themselves to show up for a 7-year-old girl who loved them with her whole heart, they no longer had the right to leech off of mine. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. Not my parents, of course not. They wouldn't deign to initiate contact unless they needed something. It was my sister, Marissa. "Scarlett, Dad's losing it. Mom's crying. Everything got shut off. Did you do something?" Her voice wasn't accusatory, not exactly. It was more weary, resigned, a familiar tone that spoke of years spent navigating the same treacherous emotional landscape. A voice that knew, deep down, exactly what our parents were capable of. "I'm just done," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "That's all." There was a long pause, a pregnant silence filled with unspoken understanding. Then, a soft, almost mournful, "Good." The rest of the day passed in a strange, almost surreal rhythm. I cleaned the kitchen, scrubbing the countertops with a newfound vigor. I washed the paintbrushes Ellie had left in the water cup, rinsing away the residual colors of her sadness. I folded laundry, the mundane task feeling strangely cathartic. Ordinary things, but each one felt different, lighter, infused with a sense of purpose, as if I was finally inhabiting a home where every corner belonged to us, where every decision was ours to make, free from the weight of obligations I never agreed to carry. That night, I helped Ellie put her new books on the shelf, carefully arranging them by color and size. She didn't mention my parents. She didn't ask why they never called. She simply leaned against me, her small body radiating warmth, and said, her voice soft and content, "I like when it's just us." And in that moment, I realized something profound. This quiet life, this sanctuary free from chaos and drama, this peaceful existence without the constant threat of emotional blackmail knocking at the door, was what she deserved all along. It was what she deserved. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how my dad would react when he fully grasped the extent of what he had lost, when he realized that his safety net had been irrevocably severed. But I knew he would react. People like him always do. They can't stand to relinquish control. And I also knew this. The calm before the storm is real. It's soft, deceptively gentle, a fleeting moment of respite that allows you just enough time to draw a deep breath, to brace yourself, to steel your resolve, before everything inevitably erupts. The next morning, at exactly 9 a.m., it did. At precisely 9 in the morning, the pounding began. Sharp, furious, relentless. It wasn't a knock, it was an assault, a violent barrage that rattled the frame of my front door, shaking the walls, as if someone was desperately trying to break it down, to force their way into our carefully constructed sanctuary. Ellie startled, nearly dropping the cereal bowl in her hands, her eyes wide with alarm. I gently pulled her behind me, shielding her from the impending onslaught, my heart pounding in my chest, but my resolve surprisingly steady. I knew who it was before he even bellowed my name. "Scarlett, open this door, now!" Howard's voice, amplified by fury, slammed through the hallway, loud enough that a neighbor hesitantly cracked open their door, their face etched with concern, then quickly retreated back into the perceived safety of their own apartment. I took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to project an air of calm I didn't necessarily feel, and unlocked the door. But I only opened it half an inch, just enough to see his face, contorted with rage, red and blotchy, the kind of unbridled fury that comes from losing control of something he thought he owned, something he believed was rightfully his. "What did you do?" he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "The phone's dead, the insurance is gone. Even the damn membership at the club. You think this is funny?" Behind him, Linda hovered, her face pale and anxious, her purse clutched tightly to her chest, her eyes darting nervously between us, as if she desperately wanted to speak, to placate him, to somehow diffuse the situation, but had long since forgotten how to assert herself, how to stand up to his volatile outbursts. And standing slightly off to the side, like silent, disapproving observers, were Valerie and Tessa, my aunt and cousin, their arms crossed, their faces tight with judgment, ready to condemn before hearing a single word. I didn't flinch. I refused to give him the satisfaction. "Everything I paid for," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper, but clear and unwavering, "I stopped paying for." Howard shoved the door wider with his palm, the cheap wood groaning in protest. I braced my foot against the frame, blocking his entry, preventing him from invading our space, from contaminating our sanctuary with his rage. His eyes flicked past me, narrowing with suspicion, zeroing in on Ellie, who was peeking nervously from the hallway, her small face etched with fear. "You're dragging her into this," he snapped, his voice rising in volume again. "You're poisoning her mind. You're trying to turn her against family." "Family?" The word almost made me laugh, a bitter, hollow sound that caught in my throat. You mean the same family who skipped her birthday because things were tight, then posted a Christmas celebration with balloon arches and mountains of gifts for Marissa's kids? Valerie huffed, her disapproval palpable. That's not the point, Scarlett. You're being dramatic as usual. Tessa chimed in, her arms folded even tighter across her chest. Everyone's talking about how you're overreacting again. You always make things bigger than they are. Ellie stepped out from behind me, her small frame radiating an unexpected strength, her voice clear and unwavering. They forgot me, she said quietly, her gaze fixed on her grandfather's face. They forgot me again. The hallway fell silent, the air thick with unspoken accusations and simmering resentment. Howard looked away first, his gaze shifting uncomfortably, unable to meet his granddaughter's unwavering stare. Then he scoffed, shaking his head dismissively. Kids don't understand these things. Adults have responsibilities, bills, priorities. Exactly. I cut in, my voice laced with sarcasm. And for years, I covered yours. His face twisted in confusion, his brow furrowed. What the hell are you talking about? I stepped fully into the doorway, no longer attempting to block his view, allowing the full weight of the truth to settle between us, to hang heavy in the air. The phone plans, the insurance, the car repairs, the emergency money. Every time you needed something, you called me, and I paid it without question. I never hesitated. I never asked for anything in return. Linda winced, her hand flying to her mouth in a gesture of dismay. Valerie frowned, her eyes darting between us, trying to assess the damage. Tessa murmured something under her breath, a dismissive platitude about familial obligation. Everyone helps their parents. It's what you're supposed to do. I held up a hand, silencing her. But when Ellie needed you, when she stood at the window on her 7th birthday, waiting for you, her heart filled with hope. When she made that drawing for Christmas and sat there in her pajamas, clutching it to her chest, holding on to the belief that you cared, you didn't even bother to show up. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The truth spoke for itself. You gave her nothing. Not a call, not a message, nothing. Howard's jaw twitched, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. We were busy, he muttered, his excuse sounding weak and hollow even to his own ears. Yes, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Busy celebrating Marissa's kids. Busy posting pictures about your favorite little ones. Busy making my daughter feel invisible. Linda finally spoke, her voice thin and reedy. We didn't mean to. I didn't let her finish. You never mean to, but you do it anyway. And that's the point. Howard's anger flared again, eclipsing his momentary discomfort. None of this explains why you shut off everything without warning, without so much as a phone call. Oh, I said, tilting my head, feigning innocence. That's not the real crisis, is it? The real crisis is that you've lost your free ride. His eyes narrowed, his gaze piercing. What are you implying? I stepped back inside, grabbed the printed packet I'd left on the entry table, and returned to the door. I held it out to him, offering it like a peace offering, but knowing full well it was a declaration of war. He didn't take it, but his eyes darted to the top line, his face paling visibly as he read the damning words. It's a loan application, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. In my name, using my identity, with your address and your phone number. Linda gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Valerie's eyes widened in disbelief. Tessa muttered, "Oh my God," her composure finally cracking under the weight of the revelation. Howard stammered, his voice cracking, his bravado crumbling. That was a misunderstanding, a simple clerical error. You forged my signature, I said, cutting through his pathetic attempts at denial. And you took nearly $8,000. His mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for air. His hands began to tremble, his wrists shaking uncontrollably. You didn't need it as much as we did, he stammered, his voice barely audible. The hallway felt colder suddenly, as if those words had drained the last vestige of warmth out of the air. Ellie stepped closer, pressing her small shoulder into my leg, seeking comfort and reassurance. I rested my hand on her head, stroking her hair, offering her silent support. You stole from your own daughter, I said quietly, my voice resonating with a quiet fury. And you justified it because you thought I wouldn't fight back, because you thought I was too weak, too afraid, too obligated to challenge you. Howard lunged forward, his hand outstretched, as if he wanted to grab the papers. to destroy the evidence of his betrayal. But I pulled them away, holding them just out of his reach. He wasn't fast enough. He never had been. Not when it came to responsibility, accountability, or basic decency. "You listen to me," he snarled, his voice dripping with menace. "If you file anything, if you go to the police—" "I already did," I said, cutting him off, my voice calm and unwavering. Silence dropped, heavy and absolute, filling the hallway like a suffocating shroud. "I filed a report yesterday morning," I continued, my gaze unwavering. "I attached all the documents, the handwriting samples, the bank transfers, the whole damn thing. Whatever happens next isn't up to me. It's up to the authorities." Linda covered her mouth, her eyes filled with horror. Valerie whispered something that sounded like a prayer, her face ashen. Tessa took a full step back, distancing herself from the unfolding drama. Howard looked stunned, not defeated, but shocked, bewildered, utterly incapable of comprehending that the one person he had always counted on to remain silent, to absorb his abuse, to enable his behavior, had finally chosen to fight back. "You wouldn't," he said, his voice barely a whisper, a plea now, not a threat. I met his eyes, my gaze calm and level, devoid of fear or regret. "I would do anything to protect my daughter, even from you." There it was, the power shift. The seismic tremor that irrevocably altered the landscape of our relationship. The moment he realized I wasn't his fixer anymore. I wasn't his safety net. I wasn't the naive, unquestioning girl who said no problem while bleeding internally. Ellie tugged on my sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Can we close the door now?" "Yes, baby," I said, my voice softening. "Yes, we can." I held Howard's gaze for one last second, just long enough for the truth to fully sink in, just long enough for him to understand the magnitude of his loss. And then I shut the door. This time, he didn't try to stop it. He didn't have the right. The silence that descended after the door clicked shut was almost unreal. Thick, heavy, oppressive, but also clean, pure, and liberating in a way I hadn't felt in years. Ellie leaned into me, her small hand still wrapped tightly around the hem of my sweater, seeking reassurance and comfort. I scooped her up into my arms, carried her back inside, locked the door, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the lock click for us, not to keep someone out, but to create a safe and secure space where we could finally heal. Over the next few weeks, everything shifted. The tectonic plates of our family dynamic rearranged themselves, creating a new, unfamiliar landscape. My parents didn't show up again. Not with apologies, not with explanations, not with last-minute, half-hearted attempts to fix what couldn't be fixed. They simply vanished from our lives, leaving behind a void that was both painful and strangely liberating. Instead, distant relatives sent passive-aggressive messages about family unity, subtly implying that I was being selfish and unforgiving. They quieted down when I didn't respond, when they realized that their attempts at guilt-tripping were falling on deaf ears. Valerie posted vague, sanctimonious quotes online about disrespectful daughters and the importance of honoring one's parents, her passive-aggressive barbs aimed squarely at me. Tessa eventually deleted half her comments when people started asking questions she couldn't answer, when the cracks in their carefully constructed facade began to widen. Marissa was the only one who checked in, genuinely, her concern laced with a hint of remorse. She dropped by with a bag of groceries one evening and admitted that she hadn't been entirely shocked by the loan application. "Dad tried something similar with me a few years back," she confessed, her voice low and hesitant. "I said no," I said, cutting her off, my voice flat and unwavering. She didn't get the chance. It wasn't comforting, but it was honest. And in its own way, it was a validation of the choices I had made. Meanwhile, life inside our apartment softened. The harsh edges of our existence seemed to smooth themselves out, creating a more peaceful and harmonious environment. Ellie began painting again, her artistic expression no longer stifled by sadness and fear. She created big, bold swirls of color, brighter and more vibrant than the muted tones she'd used in December, her artwork reflecting her growing sense of security and joy. When her school announced the Winter Art Show, one of her pieces, a whimsical depiction of a unicorn soaring through a rainbow-colored sky, was selected for the front display, a coveted honor reserved for the most talented students. She stood beside it with her hands clasped behind her back, her smile radiant but understated, radiating that quiet, profound sense of pride that I knew so well. Her teacher told me she had a genuine gift, a natural talent that should be nurtured and encouraged. I believed her. I got a raise at work too, a tangible acknowledgement of my hard work and dedication. With it came new responsibilities, increased job security, and a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a future that didn't depend on bailing anyone else out, a future I could build for myself and for Ellie. Our home felt different, lighter, warmer, infused with a sense of freedom and authenticity. It was free of obligations disguised as love, free of the constant weight of expectation and disappointment. We weren't missing anything. We were finally whole. Winter came back around before I realized it. The cyclical nature of the seasons marking the passage of time, the constant ebb and flow of life. One evening, Ellie and I were decorating our small Christmas tree, the living room glowing with the soft yellow light of the string lights, creating a cozy and intimate atmosphere. She reached into the box of ornaments and pulled out a new one, a tiny, intricately crafted gold unicorn she'd painstakingly saved her allowance to buy. She hung it carefully on a branch, stepping back to admire her handiwork, her face radiating pure, unadulterated joy, as if she'd placed a priceless treasure in the world. "Do you like it, Mom?" she asked, her voice filled with hope. "I love it," I told her, my voice thick with emotion. And I meant it, because standing there, watching her glow in the warmth of our little apartment, surrounded by the symbols of our love and resilience, I understood something clearly, something that had been obscured by years of obligation and resentment. Family isn't defined by who shares your blood. It's defined by who shows up, who protects, who loves without conditions or excuses. And sometimes, the bravest, most empowering thing you can do is walk away from the people who refuse to do any of that, to sever the ties that bind you to their negativity and dysfunction. We didn't lose anything when we cut ties with my parents. We gained peace, we gained freedom, we gained us. If you've ever had to set boundaries with your own family, if you've ever had to choose your own peace over their chaos, tell me in the comments. Share your story. Let me know that you understand. I promise you're not alone. And if this story resonated with you, if you found some measure of solace or inspiration in my experience, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because this is just the beginning. The journey is far from over.